Thomas Kuhn, in his seminal work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, originally coined the term paradigm shift. It was a term used to describe individuals, movements, entities that somehow brought about a fundamental change in the way people thought by questioning the underlying assumptions of ideas, concepts, etc. Our guest for today is one of those types of individuals who has uniquely created a concept that he has molded into a university in which people actually attend and they learn this concept in a very constructive way. It is with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce our very, very special guest for today, Mr. Sam Terrell. Sam, thank you. Very nice to meet you.
Thank you for having me.
Sam, as soon as I began looking into Divergent U and Divergent thinking, I became an immediate fan. And so I actually consider you to be a paradigm, one of these types of individuals. And I dare say, like, for example, a Galileo, a Copernicus, an Einstein, who has created something brand new. And it may in some ways create disequilibrium as well, but that's part of the growth process. So the name of the university that you have created uniquely, Divergent U,
Yes.
Divergent University, arises from a concept that you call divergent thinking. Mm-hmm. What exactly is divergent thinking?
Well, first and foremost, honored to hear you say that. I really appreciate that. Divergent thinking, converse to convergent thinking, is the ability to generate ideas. So if you think of convergent thinking like a simple equation, 2 + 2 = 4. It's variables converging to a single correct answer. Answer will always be 4. 2 + 2 will always equal 4. So any standardized test is a convergent test, whereas divergent thinking is taking a question that doesn't have a single correct answer and expanding to multiple creative and unique solutions. A question like, how do I start a business, for example, isn't a convergent question. There's not a standardized test answer to that. There are many aspects of starting a business. It's a very divergent question, but there's a lot of divergent questions that require us to think about the world differently than a convergent system. And so our education system is built based on convergent testing, standardized tests, which produces more obedience than it does leadership. And so divergent thinking is a system that produces more leadership than convergent thinking.
Because we started off leading into this, making a historical reference, I think I'm going to do it again. You might remember there was something called the Manhattan Project. Mm-hmm. It was a gathering of scientists in the United States, more specifically in the New Mexico desert, to create a nuclear weapon. Mm-hmm. Now, what these scientists did was they took a theoretical concept and they had to make it kinetic. They had to make it practical. They had to weaponize it. Now, you very uniquely, with the case of those scientists, those ideas already existed. And the Manhattan Project cost about $2 billion. And it was a huge effort involving many individuals. What you did, however, though, was that you uniquely, as an individual, as far as I can see, created this concept and, in quotes, also weaponized it as well. It's no small task. How were you able to take this concept and be able to put it into a curriculum such that you could teach? And that would also lead to the question of what is Divergent U?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So I started my first business, we'll probably talk a little bit about, is a basketball company called Hoop Brothers. Mm-hmm. And so that was really trying to get my brother a scholarship for college. I didn't have the opportunity to play college basketball, and I wanted him to have that opportunity to play college basketball. So started a film company, filming basketball games, producing.
A film company?
Yeah. And we were based in Orlando to start out, and then expanded over a decade nationally, hired a team of videographers, built out a sales process, built the brand. We've hundreds of thousands of followers, views, and ultimately learned the skills of business around my passion, which was basketball. And so Divergent U actually started as an internship within Hoop Brothers. So I was speaking at an event, and I had someone approach me and ask me if they could intern for me at Hoop Brothers because they wanted to start their own business and they wanted to learn from me. So I ended up creating an internship program and building a curriculum around how to find your passion and turn it into a business. And that was the early stages of Divergent U. And that was probably 6 or 7 years ago. So it's been step by step since then, running beta tests for curriculum. We've done now 7 cohorts, over 50 graduates from the programs, and wrote a workbook that we've published alongside that. And so it's just kind of been natural steps of development for the last 5 or 6 years now.
All right. So I take it that you did most of this yourself then.
Yeah.
And all of these other steps along the way, which are quite natural in every success trajectory of successful people, involved skill stacking. Mm-hmm. And most of this you learned on your own then through experience, through road experience, correct?
Yes, definitely.
Now, going back for a moment, we use the analogy of the Manhattan Project. Now, oftentimes when a certain great endeavor is being undertaken, there are certain spillover effects as well, too, right? In this case, for example, you talked about the film, you talked about the Hoop Brothers, et cetera, although we're not going to discuss necessarily, unless you want to, which came first, right? It seems as though one came from the other, but in a certain way in this universe, they kind of also developed simultaneously as well, because a lot of it I think came from here before it actually went to paper.
Yeah, definitely.
So speaking of the spillovers, the Manhattan Project also ended up producing secret cities, which became full-fledged cities, secret laboratories, all of which exist today. Now, I see the same kind of thing for this very unique proposition that you're doing with Divergent Thinking and Divergent U. The Divergent University, is it right now geared mostly toward an adult university of following?
Yes, it's a gap year program. Mm-hmm. So we work mostly with 18 to 24-year-old entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs, those who have creative ideas, who want to monetize that in a way that they don't have to get a 9-to-5 job, essentially. So not necessarily looking to raise the most funding. A lot of entrepreneurship programs are about getting startup capital. Divergent U is about developing the skills of being an entrepreneur. So it's not necessarily geared towards raising capital, because not every student wants to raise capital. We've had students that are professional athletes, like a skateboarder or a pro dunker, who they just want to build their brand. We've had YouTube channels, we've had natural soap companies. So there's a lot of different ideas that have come through Divergent U, but generally it's geared towards young adults who are trying to find an alternative because college hasn't worked for them, or because they have creative ideas and they want the most support possible to make those ideas happen.
I think I might actually have a business idea for you, but you may have thought of it already because you're an incredibly bright person. Have you ever heard of Kumon?
I haven't.
A Japanese educator, his name was Dr. Kumon. He developed a system of education for young people. He began to notice what he called a Swiss cheese effect. Let's say, for example, you and I were doing well in middle school. However, in math, we weren't very good at fractions. So we ended up with a B+ to an A- average, and the minus was caused because of not doing well in fractions. Nevertheless, it was good enough to move on to the next grade, right? However, now a hole in this Swiss cheese was created, because the next year when we come around, that the fractions, unless we've done something in the interim, is weak, right? And so what Dr. Kumon did was he basically organize an after-school activity where children would go to, and they would focus uniquely on word comprehension exercises as well as math. They would start at a grade level that was their true grade level. They would give them an examination to find out what their true grade level was, not the grade level they were in for that specific subject. And then they would start at that point and go through time tests. very repetitive, and then start moving up. And they ended up moving up faster than kids in their own grade level, to the point where you had, for example, middle school kids doing integral calculus, right? Now, what you're describing, it seems to, and you feel free to, you have the experience in this area, but feel free to correct me if need be. This sounds like something that you could probably even franchise.
Definitely.
Very much like Dr. Kumon did for kids after school, that their parents would take them to online, but the live thing is what really gave Kumon its appeal. Appeal. Can you see Divergent U getting to that point of being able to create satellite franchises?
Definitely. So I see it as my life mission at this point, to create a new system of education. And I'm starting that with Divergent U, which is the basically college alternative gap year program, leadership academy, if you want to call it that. But that is just one step. So once that model's fully functioning and complete, like right now we're still in beta test to some degree. We're doing our first 9-month program, which is over 200 workshops live in person, over 30 coaching sessions for every student that goes through the program. And then every student gives a speech on stage at the end of the program at our largest event of the year. So that's where we're at in the process now. But coming in the next decade, I could definitely see us franchising that globally, and also building programs that are middle school, high school, K through 12. But starting with Divergent U, I really want to nail down everything perfectly here first.
You mentioned events, you mentioned workshops, programs, and a lot of them too. Is this more in response to a demand for these services, or is it, or at this point, is it more that you're just hitting the pavement, trying to get as much as basically build it as much as you can?
It's a bit of both. I think the demand is going to rise. I think the problem is clear. So some of the data, 77% of college students are experiencing psychological distress in college, where over 98% of Divergent U students have seen improvements in mental health. So on one side, college is putting students through a very challenging mental process. Look at the cost of college over 4 years. 4 years, the money invested into college versus 1 year of Divergent U, it's a tenth of the cost, not even. So I think the problem is there in our college system.
Yes. And
Divergent U is answering the demand for that. That is starting to arise, but I think the demand for alternatives to college is only going to get louder. So I think we're hedging towards that. But I don't think the demand has reached its peak yet, and I think that will continue to grow in the coming years.
You may have seen me smile when you mentioned about some of the difficulties that young people have vis-a-vis college, vis-a-vis emotional issues, and it's not because I'm a sadist, but because simultaneously, 2 light bulbs went off above my head. I remember going to university, and it was, even though it was, I suppose, even relatively cheaper. In absolute terms back then, of course, it was cheaper, but relatively cheaper. It was still a hard thing. I remember barriers to entry, not only in terms of testing and everything that comes along with that, but the fact that not all of us come from a privileged background, and we have to end up working. And not only that, but the costs of education, the barriers to entry are very, very high. Divergent University seems to a certain degree, solve or attempt to solve some of that. Would you agree?
Definitely. Definitely. I think it sets students up to create a clear path for their future. So a lot of students are struggling to find meaning in the college system. They're struggling to find their career path, and they're struggling to figure out how to make their ideas tangible. And so Divergent U is the solution. It's the place where students come meet like-minded peers in person. I believe that the in-person experience is absolutely crucial for social development in some sense, personal development. I don't think you can do personal development online because you're interacting with a screen, not a person.
Absolutely.
How can that be personal? Right?
Absolutely.
So personal development's a big aspect of it. Leadership development's a big aspect of it. And then business development are the 3 pillars for Divergent U. But yeah, a lot of students in college, I think, are going through the motions, feeling like they have to pass this test to get this degree, to land that job. And I believe the world is changing a lot. I think artificial intelligence changes the way we need to think about education. Artificial intelligence, going back to our opening point, can get to that convergent answer a lot quicker and easier than people can generally. We need to be divergent thinkers. We need to be able to ask the right questions and prompt the artificial intelligence. And so students have to be able to think for themselves, not indoctrinated to think a certain way, but taught how to explore and expand on their own ideas. And so that's what we're focusing on at Divergent U.
A moment ago, reading between the lines, it seems like Divergent University is focused on creating a certain spirit or essence of entrepreneurship among young people. I remember one of the difficulties I had going to university is that I naturally expected them to find me a job in some way, or at least to facilitate it, and that didn't really happen. Right. I know some schools are better than that. Does Divergent University have some form of assistance, not only financial assistance, but also for job placement, or are you actually more focused on not job placement, but creating the spirit within for people to...
I would say that the tangible result is the entrepreneurship results. So monthly revenue in their business is what we're aiming to increase. And so we have students that just started. We're 4 weeks into our 9-month program right now, and in our promotions, we talk about students getting their first sale by the end of the second trimester. So 6 months into the program, they should get their first sale. They have an opportunity to register their business. We're 4 weeks in, and our students presently, we have a handful of students who are probably going to close their first sale next week. Wow. So that we're 5 months ahead of schedule for several of the students. And my goal is for at least one from every class, and every class is 9 or less students in the class. So you're talking to a small group around a table. And my goal is for one student from each group, at least one by the end of the 9 months, to reach $10,000 a month in revenue.
So if I understand then, it's not like a traditional MBA program, let's say, where you go to class, you may do an internship, but the expectation would be that you complete school and then you look for a job. If I understand correctly, you give them the educational component, but concurrent to that, we have two spinning Chinese plates.
There's three actually. So
tell me about the third one.
We have the workshops, which are every day. So every day in person, we have workshops, 7 total workshops per week. Second to that is the coaching sessions. So alongside the one-on-one coaching, we're holding students accountable to goals. So very first week of class, we sit down and say, what are all of your ideas? What are all the projects you're considering or have considered? Side hustles, freelance opportunities, creative projects. And we kind of throw everything at the wall. And then step by step, we start to piece together what are the steps you could take to advance this idea. And it's not about getting to some big goal at the end. It's just about taking a micro step every week. And so once the students get into the habit of that, they have accountability partners with the one-on-one coaching. The goals start to get accomplished just by natural progression in an environment where everyone's doing the same thing, advancing their own goals. It doesn't take that long to see progress. But the third component is actually the peer co-working space. So on top of the workshops and the one-on-one coaching sessions, students are also in a co-working space several hours a week to work on their projects. They have that time set aside for projects, but also time to collaborate with peers. So those 3 components are taking place side by side as the curriculum is developing for the 9 months. So it's workshops, the one-on-one coaching sessions, and then the peer co-working space.
So in effect, you've created a group that is educational, but at the same time, you essentially have maybe something akin to your basketball team, right? Where you're Coach Wooden, you remember Coach Wooden, right? And you play the game, well, but you're learning at the same time, as well as coaching each other. And the coaching doesn't only come from you or instructors, but from the rest of the team.
Exactly. And there's something about that, where every workshop we start with the question of the day. So I'll write a question on the whiteboard, and then everyone will write their answer and share it, as opposed to just sharing their answer, because that prevents groupthink. They have to think for themselves and write their own answer. And so every single day starts with the question on the whiteboard and then answering that question. So you're hearing from everyone in the room's perspective. If we're talking about marketing, for example, you're hearing every business in the room's ideas on marketing, which is applying to everyone. So it's not just the material that's being taught, it's the mastermind discussion that's being had, that everyone's growing from everyone else. So I feel like it's my job as the facilitator to hold space for the room, for the discussion, to make sure everyone's heard, to make sure all ideas are moving along and we're keeping progress. But generally, 80% of the conversation comes from the students. And so I can't necessarily predict every single class what is going to happen in every single class, because I don't know what everyone's bringing to the table. But when you create that mastermind environment, it really allows everyone to absorb those ideas from others and implement things. And we have a structure to it, but it has its own creative flow to it as well, where ideas evolve naturally.
So it truly is interactive.
Definitely.
In a 360-degree way.
Literally, it's not like a lecture where I'm standing at the front of a class and students are facing me. I'm with a whiteboard and we're all sitting around a table. So literally 360 degrees looking at each other, like engaged in the conversation. We have a reconnect policy in our first trimester, which is no technology in class. And so everyone has to be fully engaged in the discussions.
No technology, meaning no cell phones.
No phone, no laptop, no tablet. It's all written notebooks and discussions. And if someone needs to step out to take a phone call or a text message, they can do that. But it is all in person and all technology free in that first 90 days. We move into the second 90 days. We're doing business development, artificial intelligence, website development, social media, all of that. But in the beginning, it's fully reconnected.
I'm obviously much older than you are. One of the things that life has taught me is that we all have two bank accounts. We have a financial bank account and we have an emotional bank account. The financial bank account pretty much speaks for itself. The emotional bank account is what most personal development gurus touch upon, but most of them have realized that personal development is one of those areas where it's very hard to measure. And so many gurus, in my opinion, make their money on the fact that it's hard to measure, and they don't discuss the how.
Absolutely.
However, you can't really have the financial bank account without first taking care of the emotional bank account.
Sure.
Now, I may seem to be a little bit long-winded. It's because I'm a systemic thinker, and it'll all come together, but you probably have already figured out where I'm going. Traditional education, especially at the university level, if you have to categorize it as either the emotional bank account or the financial bank account, probably really doesn't address either.
Right.
Probably doesn't really address either. But if it has to address something, and we're not looking at majors such as, let's say, liberal arts or Chicano studies, but something more along the lines of architecture, accounting, business, they probably veer more towards the financial bank account, if at all, than the emotional bank account. Is the curriculum, the books, the material for Divergent U solely focused on the emotional aspect, the interior building, or do you actually do cover some of the course material that you would find in a traditional university, accounting, finance, that sort of thing?
It's a complicated question. So I think on the college side, it seems like the value is actually mostly social. So what I mean by that is that there's a lot of social pressure to get a college degree, more so than there is the value in the actual degree, I think. And so I think a lot of the reason people are in school is because of the social aspect of the bank account, if you want to say that if they were to leave college, that would have a social impact on relationships.
Yes.
And so I think that is what is keeping college held up in some sense is the stigma that it's very important that everybody needs to go to college. And because of that, a lot more people are going to college than I think is necessary. To answer that on the Divergent U front, it's absolutely both. We have 3 trimesters. So the first one is fully personal development. In the personal development, there's 3 core courses around that. Kind of, you could say mind, body, and emotions. So the emotions, we have an emotional balance class, which focuses on 9 different ways you can look at communication. So you can sort communication through past, present, future, positive, neutral, negative, and that creates 9 boxes. So for example, if I said tomorrow will be a good day, I'm speaking future positive. That's the language of hope. I'm communicating hope. If I say tomorrow will be a bad day, I'm communicating future negative. That's fear. And so we're working through this emotional map, so to speak, with the students is one of the 3 courses on the personal development side. The second is healthy habits. And so we focus on 4 core elements for healthy habits: breath, rest, nutrition, and exercise. And so that's not just learning. We're actually implementing that. We work with the gym across the street. So some of the health classes take place at the gym. And then the third one is I would say the flagship course for the personal development, which is the 12 Limitations. And the 12 Limitations is a philosophy I created around what can stop your idea. And so the 12 limitations are everything that can stop an idea from coming into fruition, whether that be your beliefs, your discipline, your money, time, connections, culture, rules, to name a few. And so the 12 limitations class looks at each limitation and reverse engineers how do you overcome each of these one by one. And it's not testing, it's setting goals and seeing if we can accomplish those goals. We're trying to push the boundaries of what's possible. And so that's the personal development side. And that's only 3 months out of the 9-month program. The second trimester is where we focus on the business. And there's 8 steps of that we focus on step by step. I can go into details on that. I'll briefly mention each of those. So the 8 steps: brand building, number 1. Offer creation, so what you sell. Marketing, how do you get that to more people? Sales, how do you get leads across the finish line to become clients? And then post the sale, you've got operations, how do you create a standard operating procedure in your business? Profit, budgeting for profit. Leadership, hiring, management. And then lastly is protection, things like trademarks and things of that nature. So it's eight steps of business development to help them make their first sale, build a sales system, create consistent offers, hire their first team member, and scale their business. And that's in the business section of the class. So it's broken up really well, and we try to cover everything they need to be successful as an entrepreneur.
And everything that you explained a moment ago, whether you're a religious person or not, whether you believe in God, whatever that means, because, and I don't mean that in a cute way because of any kind of belief system I have, but oftentimes you don't really know what someone is talking about until they define what it is that they mean by that, you know? But everything you were saying earlier, there almost seems to be a spiritual component to it. Almost something reflective of Eastern philosophy, Zen, balance. Is there anything in your biography, in your life experience that I haven't seen? Because I've tried to research you as best as I can, but I didn't see anything that showed you, for example, at a ashram in India, right?
Yeah.
But is there anything that or are you just naturally that kind of a person that's very Zen, very, very much into holistic approach to life?
Definitely. There's a lot to unpack there.
Really?
So
okay.
I think starting on the philosophical side, with Divergent U, the idea of a power structure, I think about power like a pyramid is a convergent power structure. And it's basically saying that power is at the top and you have to compete to climb your way to the top of that pyramid. A divergent power structure would be a solar system. So the sun is in the middle, it's the source of power. A divergent structure would be an atom. There's a nucleus in the middle, and electrons orbit around it. So I think a divergent power structure is actually more natural in nature. And I think that a true hierarchy in nature isn't pyramid in shape, it's spherical. And so I think about power as something that expands from the center, not something that you have to climb a pyramid to reach. And I think there is a somewhat of that you could consider a spiritual aspect, because I think it's the power within you.
Yeah. And we're not talking about necessarily a structured religion,
right?
But something even deeper than that.
Yeah. I think it's looking at what, if you think about ideas, where do ideas come from?
Right.
I think there's a difference between ideas and facts. And so facts are the tangible information. So like if you look around the room, there's a glass of water, there's a table here, there's so much tangible information, but the ideas that we have or our belief system are what guide us to the facts. And so we're looking at the facts through the lens of ideas. So I think ideas are actually more important than facts.
Yes.
A tangible way to think about that is there's a fact of the square footage of my house, but there's an idea that my house is a home. And I think the idea that my house is a home is more motivating and powerful than just the square footage of the house, which is a fact.
Correct.
So you could say that's a spiritual component. I think I think about it a little more philosophically. But if my spiritual background, so I grew up, my mom was in a religion that was later classified as a cult, which was based on Christianity. But they predicted the doomsday and all of these things in the 80s. And so she turned the opposite direction and essentially went completely against traditional religion and raised us very secularly.
Right.
And then in college, I met a roommate, a friend of mine who was really into meditation. I learned a little bit about that. And then it's just been picking up pieces, I think, along the way. But there's not been a major retreat or something like that that I've gone to. I've done many little things like that, but nothing that I can say was like the pivotal point. I think it's just been a continual journey.
It almost seems like though it was in you all the time and you just didn't know about it. Someone once asked Michelangelo, or more appropriately Michelangelo, how are you able to create such beautiful artwork, angels, the Virgin Mary, David, out of a solid block of marble? And he said, the angel, the statue of David, the Virgin, was already in there. All I just did was to liberate them by removing the marble around them, right? And I think it was always within you. You may not have noticed it, right? So much of Western thinking is about categorizing things, clobbering it into some block, in the same way we would put a square block into a square block. You familiar with or heard of the philosophy of existentialism?
I've heard of it. I'm sure I know a little bit, but I don't. Could you explain more?
Sure. I'll explain through an example. And it divergent you and divergent thinking seems to think or perhaps perceive the world in a similar way. The standard thinking, I crossed a bridge, right? I crossed the same bridge 12 times, right? An existentialist would say, you crossed 12 different bridges at 12 different times. Why? Because time is a factor, and the river beneath the bridge, the water is constantly moving, and it may be water, but it's not the same water that was there a moment ago. It's a different way of looking at the world.
Yeah.
And it's actually if you really think about it, it's a quite liberating concept, but at the same time in a fearful way, because it makes you realize that you are completely responsible for your own life. And I do believe in prayer, however, that everything essentially derives from our own will to get something done. Divergent U, if I interpret it correctly, is a congress of individuals who understand that. Rather, in the traditional education system, I suddenly feel like I have an epiphany, right? Thanks to you, in that we are putting off some of our own fears, some of our own inactions by paying a university, having a lecturer teach us, and somehow expecting that something is going to come of that.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think the first thing that came to me is going back to the 12 limitations. I think that you want to make it very tangible so that it's not just any idea can become real and there's nothing stopping you and everyone's capable of accomplishing anything. I don't believe that's true. I think we have to identify the practical limitations. What is actually stopping something from coming into fruition, and then how do you approach that? And so we don't approach it by saying there are no limits, anybody can do anything. We approach it by saying, what are the limitations? How do we face those forthrightly and overcome them, rather than saying that's a limitation, I can't do it, and move on. Say that's a limitation that's preventing me. What can I do to overcome that limitation? It's a totally different mindset. Another thing that came up while you were talking was the one way that I frame the difference between convergent and divergent thinking is the difference between a predator and a tree.
Wow.
So,
okay, I'd like to hear what
think about a lion, for example, is a convergent hunter. It's converging on the prey. It has to identify the prey and then it moves towards that. And so predators are hungry often, and they need to be able to hunt constantly to survive, which a lot of business mindset, I think, is around this like predator mindset of like you're hunting and you're trying to be the alpha. And I think if you look at the way that a tree functions, it's actually more of a staple to the ecosystem than the predator. So a tree is not converging on prey. A tree is growing up, it's diverging. So it's expanding up to the sun and it's expanding down into the earth. And so it's going both directions and just sitting still. And so if you think about building a business with a divergent mindset, you're not trying to hunt to get the next meal, and that you're building something that feeds an ecosystem. Because for a tree to reproduce, it only has to have one seed that plants and then becomes a new tree, and it produces millions of seeds, which means all of those seeds are feeding the ecosystem, and that's what feeds the prey that the predator ultimately eats. So would you rather your business be the predator where you have to hunt for every meal, or would you rather be the tree that's feeding the entire ecosystem? And so the idea of a like diverging, if you think about your idea is a seed, it's not going to get to fruit and profit quickly. And so a lot of people see that and they say, well, I don't know how I'm going to get to profit, so I don't think this is a good idea to pursue at all, or I don't know if I should. They get lost at that part. And if you just water the seed and you just keep making progress, just keep deepening the roots, just keep getting closer to the sun, it expands naturally, and eventually you get to fruit. And then a single seed can ultimately produce an entire forest, because those seeds can then expand infinitely. So that's what came up when you mentioned that.
I once heard a discussion somewhere where it was a young lady. She said, do you know what the largest organism is on planet Earth? And you may already know about this. And evidently there's some kind of a tree system somewhere in Utah.
Yep.
You've heard about it.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, so there's a tree system, so people would look at the tree as an individual tree. However, if you go beneath the ground, what the tree has done over 2,000 years, maybe even more, right? Even before Christ. What the tree has done is sprouted other trees using a common root system, such that you may look at a large group of trees, but in fact, it's actually one organism, right? And so now where I'm going with this is these interactive sessions that you have where everyone kind of learns from one another seem to resemble that in a form of multidimensional chess. Okay. You mentioned also about the 12 limiting factors. It seems to be an environment, a form where people are literally forced to reveal that part of themselves which they might not do so otherwise for the discomfort of doing so in front of others, you've created a safe area where they can do that and thereby liberate themselves. Similar to almost like a 12-step program.
Sure. Yeah. I wouldn't say it's force. I would say that it's a safe environment where those ideas can be heard. So like everyone is welcome to bring their limitations in some sense. Like nobody's judged for what they can't do. We're all pushing the boundaries of what can be done. So I think it's a safe place for humility for sure, for everyone to identify like what's stopping them and how to overcome that. And you create a really good friendship too. I mean, we've had relationships come from Divergent U. There's been roommates that have come out of Divergent U, business partners you spend time with people in a room masterminding and growing and focusing on everyone's growth. There's naturally good things that come from that.
I think you hit on a really good point. America likes to think of itself, American universities, very much as a alumni-friendly environment, and I think the alumni idea is very strong in the United States, but I think to a large degree it's all a fugazi. I did my undergraduate at UCLA, and for years they've been sending me email. First they were letters, and then when the internet came in, emails.
Yeah.
So for me to contribute. But there was never any quid pro quo.
Right.
Never any quid pro quo. They just wanted me to give them money. But it was like, are you good looking or do you play the banjo well? I mean, I need to get something in return.
Right.
And they never seemed to think that if they just took an extra step to understand who I am and what it is that I need, I might actually send them some money. Do you have something in place that at least fills that gap where the American universities are failing, or maybe is that on your radar to develop?
In terms of the alumni network.
In terms of the alumni network to develop something perhaps more akin to a tribe.
Sure. We currently have weekly events, Tuesdays and Thursdays every week. We do free events for the community. Alumni frequently attend. So they're getting to be a part of the community locally here in Orlando, just at our regular basis, even after they graduate. But we do host quarterly events as well that are exclusive to the alumni. And so those might be like a retreat for a few days, or that might be a single event that's a one-day event in Orlando. Could be an online event sometimes. There's definitely plans in place to expand that. It's not top of mind right now, but that's what we have in place at the moment.
I've never heard of anything else, anything similar to Divergent U. Are you aware of any competitors that you might have, or at least maybe not competitors, anyone else doing anything similar? I haven't heard of anything like that.
There's just a few different categories I think you could put it in. I think business accelerators is one, but I think business accelerators focus again more on investors usually, and not as much personal development and leadership development. I don't know if there's a specific competitor I could point to
that is actually a university,
right?
Rather than a business coach or a success guru that has a seminar,
right,
that will basically go away when he dies,
right. And that's a big part of Divergent U. I never wanted it to be like Sam Terrell, follow what I'm doing. That's not at all the point. The point is the students are the leaders, and so I'm trying to do my best to create an environment for Divergent U where everyone can lead. And so it's not about following what I created, it's about leading what you want to create. And so it's creating an environment where people can do that. I don't know if there's a specific competitor. I know gap year programs is another one that you could kind of position it in that way. I think of it as a leadership academy. So I couldn't point to any specific competitors.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because most business programs that I'm aware of, there's one or two exceptions. The military academy would be one, and I think there's a college somewhere in Michigan. If you were to go there, and based upon your own experience, both in education as well as in business, probably you would. I wouldn't say probably, because you've already figured it out. There are several areas where you won't find these classes being taught in school. And I think you hit on a few of them right away. One of them is leadership. I don't know any MBA programs, really. other than maybe the Naval Academy, West Point, and that one school in Michigan, whatever the name is, that teaches leadership. Another one is how to buy a business, and the other one is how to sell a business. And so if you walk into an MBA program and you say, okay, do you have any classes in leadership? No, we don't. Any classes on how to buy a business? No, we don't. Any class on how to sell a business? No, we don't. Then what kind of a program do you have, right? What's the point of the whole program? I think that you've basically taken the essence, and if you were to put it into a test tube and spin it ultra fast in a nuclear centrifuge, your yellow cake, your plutonium, you figure that out with Divergent U.
I try to put as much as possible into 9 months. So as it expands, right now we're working with a co-working space that we partner with. That's where all the classes take place. It's in Avalon Park. It's an awesome campus called the 5th Floor. But eventually we want to expand into our own campus. And so we'd have, student housing on campus at some point. We would have organizations on campus, student clubs and things of that nature. I think those components of college are what a lot of people want to go to college for, is the environment to meet others. And the degree is usually like that thing that you have to check the box on, but it's not necessarily what everyone's excited about.
Right.
So I want to create that college environment that brings that excitement while also providing the most important areas of growth and personal development and leadership development and business development. And again, I think artificial intelligence has a big role in the thinking process around that, because we haven't had AI until recently, and that's going to disrupt college, because anything that's a standardized test that we can just type in our phone and get an answer from artificial intelligence on, why do we need to know how to do that anymore? What we need to know how to do is to lead and to ask the right questions, because the ability to build a business is so much easier than it's ever been with the tools that are accessible now. And so most of it's mindset. People haven't thought that their ideas can actually become a real business, or they don't think that they're someone who's capable of building a business. Most of that's just mental blocks. And so once you get past that and say, well, you actually can do this, and you see examples of other people doing it that you're like, wow, they didn't think they could do it. They built a business as well. It's just a matter of creating that environment and fostering that.
So much of education, at least U.S. education, is going online everywhere.
Yep.
You seem to be going in the opposite direction. I'm sure you have things online as well too.
Not at the moment.
No?
So we have
Not at
content.
all.
We have social media content online, but no classes online. And there's a few reasons for that. I think number one, information is free in the world of today. So I don't want to charge for information. We'll put all of our coursework out for free. We have an ebook that's out for free that goes over our most of our curriculum. So I don't want to charge for information, because I don't think it's necessary in today's world. I'd rather get people the information. I think the value of education is the environment. I think being in a space where your ideas are heard, where you're seen, where you're able to be challenged and you're growing, is so different than, let's just say, like interfacing with a computer screen or a phone screen. You're not present in that. You're not able to actually develop or challenge your own thinking. So being in an environment where that little bit of pressure is on there for you to engage in the discussion, you're growing so much more than you would in an online space. And I also want Divergent U to be in a position to influence culture in a physical place. So I mean, when I think about 10 years from now, I think Divergent U will be a center point of culture for whatever city the campus is ultimately built in, because the graduates that come out of Divergent U will be contributing so much to the community, because that's what they're being trained on how to do, is how do you contribute your ideas in a way that's beneficial to others and profitable for you. So I think there's something magical about the in-person component.
I do too.
And that's more, when the pandemic happened. So it was 2019. We had our first beta test. Then we had 2 more beta tests. Then we wrote our workbook. Going into 2020, I had just given a TED talk. My first business, hiring a CEO to run. Divergent U's now up and running. I felt like we've made it at that point. And then the pandemic collapsed everything. So first business, we had to let go our entire staff. We lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue. barely survived as a company. Divergent U was in person. And so now I'm in this position where I had to decide whether or not stay in person. Pandemic, you can't really do that, or move it online, which I never wanted to do. And every person advising me, staff, advisors, students, everyone suggested it would be good if I went online. And in my gut, it didn't feel like what I was supposed to do. I always felt like Divergent U was meant to be a place. So when people walk in the doors, there's a feeling around that.
You didn't want it to turn it into another MIC university.
I just think it's also an exclusivity thing that everyone's building an online class. If you can't get access to Divergent U unless you're in person, you've got to be here. Like you've got to be bought into the experience. It shows a level of commitment that everyone who's bought in is willing to show up every day. There's students driving 45 minutes to and 45 minutes from campus to get home. So like if you're not that invested as everybody else, that level of investment, it matters in the result. And so if you just buy an online course, 90% of online courses aren't finished. 99% of books people buy they don't finish. But when you're in a course where you're held accountable, it's a totally different environment. But getting back to what I was saying on the pandemic side, I think we did ultimately move it online for a period. We did cohorts online that were on Zoom discussions, and all things considered, I think it went really well, but it just wasn't the heart of what I wanted to do. And I think there's times, my lesson from that was that there's times when even everyone around you is telling you, no, you should do it this way because it makes more sense. Online, it's scalable. It can reach more people. All of that makes sense, but there's a lot of those options. And so if people want to find something they can do simply online, there's plenty of those options. Divergent U's not that. We'll find the partners that we can partner with who will do the online component.
Your gut was telling you.
Yeah.
Something deeper down was telling you the human aspect, the connection.
Yeah.
is still very important.
I think that we're starved for that right now. Since the pandemic, there hasn't been spaces where people can go in person and be themselves, be comfortable. Everything's on the phone. And we don't know the psychological impact that has on generations of people. But what I'm seeing in person is how well the students are developing their own leadership by having their voice heard every day, by being in a space where it's not just an online class that they're getting a lecture, taking notes, and preparing for a test. It's a question of the day that they have to answer in their own unique way and hear how others answer that question and then engage in discussions. And then there's that space after class where you're talking to the person and you have that co-working time and then you're partnering. Like those things just don't happen in the online space. And I'm comfortable not getting the online audience. If there's people that are searching for that, there are a lot of options.
Intuitively, I think maybe even not intuitively, you maybe completely consciously, you may have discovered the following. Have you ever been to a gun range? Do you like firing weapons?
It's not often.
Right. But I think you'll still understand the analogy. Okay. In the military, at least, especially in the Marine Corps, in spite of all of the optics that we can place on top of weapons, you are required to qualify using iron sights. Where you basically have the metal with a smaller metal in the middle. Why? Because that develops your ability to take the right breathing, use the right breathing when shooting, the right positioning, all of that. When you use completely advanced optics, you can kind of cheat. The problem is if you're in a tight spot and the battery runs out or the lighting is just not quite right, you're completely lost. So and the same thing goes with sales. No matter how much online we have, if you have the inability to connect with another human being, ultimately you're going to have to, in order to make the sale, you're going to have to look into the individual's eyes, gain their trust, right?
I think there's also the deep fakes videos now. I think with artificial intelligence, branding in person matters. If something's happening at a physical place, it's real.
Yes.
If you see something online that you don't know where it is, we're getting into a point where we don't know what's real, because there's so much you can create with artificial intelligence, with deep fake videos that can do voiceovers of anyone, essentially. That in-person element, I think, is going to become more trusted than the online, because the online, it's not tangibly grounded to anything. Whereas if there's a building where something happens, one thing we've noticed even just in our general sales process, let's say for Divergent U, if someone attends a live event where we do examples of our workshops, anyone can come for free, they're significantly more likely to take the class than if they hear about the class online.
Yes.
And there's something about being in the environment that you understand what it is at that point. And because it's a bit of an outlier, it's kind of a unique program, most people are curious and confused about what Divergent U even is. And that's what we have those sample events for. They're free. Anyone can attend. And when they come out to an event, then they get a feel for like, okay, this is how this environment works.
People watching us are going to be attracted by these free, what was the term you used? Workshops, free events, because at that point they're not committed to the hook. Right. Where someone says, okay, now this has been the first time we've spoken on the phone. Will you give me a credit card information, right? And then immediately, some people will give the credit card information. Others immediately, the hair on their ears start to go up and say, well, why do you need my credit card information? This is our first conversation. You haven't sold me yet. Can you tell us a little bit about these free events? Because people will want to know about it.
Yeah, every Tuesday and Thursday, 6 to 8 p.m. live at our campus, and meetup.com/divergentu. So every event takes place live in person, and it's samples of the material. So one of the workshops is over the 12 limitations. How do you develop a visionary mindset? One of the workshops is around healthy habits. One is around emotional balance. We have 2 business development workshops, and then 2 networking events. So just going to our events page or on any of the platforms, people can find which events resonate with them, what they want to learn. And it's just an opportunity for them to learn in the Divergent U environment and meet others and get an experience for that experience, basically.
I've always believed that behind every successful person in their success trajectory, there's a personal story. Now, looking at you, you're a tall, nice-looking guy.
I appreciate it.
Young, but so you don't have the look of someone who's been through a lot. But I know that you've had a tough life. Yeah. I know you've had a tough life, and some of which you've even described to us regarding what happened during COVID. But I know it goes deeper than that, even into your childhood. If somehow that none of that took place, you, let's say, were born and raised in New England. Your father went to Yale. Your mother went to Harvard. Your pension fund. You were not in want of anything. Chances are good you would have probably become successful. Do you think if life had been different? In other words, do you think the adversity that you came from actually helped you, or do you think that had you not had that adversity, you might have even gone farther?
Interesting. It's hard to say. I think one thing, just kind of a sidebar on that, and then I'll answer that specifically. But we say like hindsight's 20/20. That phrase. I don't think so, because I think hindsight only shows you like one path. You're like, I made this decision and so forth, it led to here. So now I know hindsight's 20/20. I get the whole thing. But you don't know what happened if you made the other infinite amount of decisions you would have made.
Correct.
So you're not actually, hindsight's not 20/20, because you're only seeing the outcome of one decision versus the infinite amount of other decisions. So it's hard to look back and say how things would have been different, or what would have changed or influenced had I been raised in a different place or not had challenging experiences. But to touch on that a little bit, when I was a kid, my family moved a lot. And so I think the most difficult thing for me growing up was not having a stable home. Never went to the same school for more than 2 years in a row. It was one school, homeschooled, private school, public school. There's highs and lows. So like one point we lived in a 7-bedroom house. At one point we were kind of homeless, living out of a van for a short period of time. And so it's hard to say without those experiences what would have changed or would have been different. I think I definitely learned how to be adaptable more than anything else. I learned how to be adaptable, and I learned how to define home for myself as something that you create and spread and share with others. So I think it definitely informed a lot of who I am and the things I've done, but it's very difficult to say how much so.
It is difficult, and it does resemble to a large extent chaos theory, where small change over time can create. However, in your instance, as a third party, as an outsider, and in part looking at your biography as well as a short conversation we had before we started recording, I think that the adversity actually polished you. You know, you could have chosen to another path, but at the same time, most of us who have become successful became successful in spite of what we had, but there was still a nucleus that guided us to the right way, and oftentimes it's an unnamed individual. And I think in your case, you had that nucleus, mostly in the story of your mom. This is just my perception.
Yeah. I mean, she was an entrepreneur in the 80s. Like, I think
she was an entrepreneur.
Yeah, she was an entrepreneur. She's been an entrepreneur, still an entrepreneur.
Oh, it's something I missed.
And so she's started, as a woman in tech, was a pioneer in some sense. And just always invested into us and our ideas, and told us it was possible, and not just like told us we could do things, but invested her time, invested her money into backing that up. If we had a dream or an idea we wanted to pursue, she would invest into that. And so I can't imagine I'd be the same person without her example as an entrepreneur and her investment. I think I grew up never thinking I would have a regular job because I never had that modeled to me. It was normal to be an entrepreneur. That wasn't like a crazy idea or outside of the box.
You were a divergent kid.
100%. And my mom very much so challenged the education system in a lot of ways, and didn't like the standardization of it. And so part of the reason we were moving was usually to put us in a better school. Almost always it was trying to find the best opportunity for us, despite other circumstances.
See, somewhere as a child, you even recognized it back then. I think so.
Yeah.
As children, we're not sophisticated enough to really realize it, but even at that level, somehow you recognize that back then.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. There's so many people that said that if I had invested $1 in buying a Coca-Cola stock in 1905 or whenever, that's unreasonable though, because none of us are still around from 1905, but more recently, let's say Apple or Google, I would have been rich. Now the catch is that none of us knew that Apple, Google, Microsoft would become what it has. I actually have spoken with a school teacher, who was an early investor in Apple, and she was just lucky, right? And now she has more than enough money to live for the rest of her life, more than enough money. I see something similar in Divergent U as perhaps being the next Apple, the next Google, the next Microsoft. And so in the fact that we've mentioned it, and the fact that we've talked about its growth potential, I'm sure that there's going to be people who would be thinking, how can I invest in Divergent U? How can I jump on? But in a passive way. So I suppose from that, two things I'm thinking of. One is, would you ever consider taking, if you presented the opportunity, taking Divergent U public? And even if we haven't gotten to that point yet, if someone wants to get in early, as seeing another Google, another Apple, another Microsoft, are you of the mind to embrace that, or do you have the means to accept that?
Well, first, very humbling to be even thought of or mentioned in that kind of conversation. I would say right now, the first thing I would recommend anybody who's wanting to get involved to do would be to attend events. Come out to those live events, and there's definitely opportunities. I would talk about those more on a one-on-one basis, but there's definitely opportunities at the early stage. I don't think we'll ever go public. That's not in the plan. That may happen, but at this point, it's not part of the overarching plan. As far as investors, I've gotten offers several times for investors. Wonderful. And have declined because I don't want to give equity at the moment. And it needs to be the right partner, and it needs to be the right situation. So I'm open to it, but I haven't jumped at that yet. I think the first step would be someone attending our events and just getting to know the idea of Divergent U and the team a little bit better.
So you're very much concerned about the essence of Divergent U, and there you might have some concerns about that being diluted by shareholders' concern about the stock going up or down in a quarter, instead of looking at what it is that you're seeking to accomplish.
Well, even with the students, we're not teaching the students to maximize dollars at all costs. We're teaching students to pursue what's meaningful to them and find a way to make that profitable for their lifestyle. It's a very different mindset than trying to make as much profit as possible. If we were trying to make as much profit as possible, I would probably be more for the online version, but that's not what I feel is the purpose of Divergent U. So if I'm going to help the students figure out how to cultivate that for themselves, I feel like I have to be the example of that.
Very, very successful individual people have learned somewhere along the way that most of them, they can't do it all by themselves.
100%.
That they form a dream team. Do you have a dream team, and can you tell us about it?
I would say that I'm in the midst of forming that team. With my first business, Hoop Brothers, definitely. We haven't talked about Jess at all. She's my CEO now for my first business, Hoop Brothers. I hired her as an admin in 2015, and she grew throughout the company and became integral to every part of the business, where now she's a partial owner and CEO. So when I stepped down as CEO, I promoted her to CEO and stepped fully into Divergent U. So I've built that dream team in the first business. I think for Divergent U, I'm still in the process of assembling different pieces of that team.
Wonderful. And Divergent U is, we're not building a textile factory. So, and it's not all online. Would you think, in terms of financing, there are many ways to finance, but was this a type of business concept that required heavy capital requirements, lots of financing, or was it something that rather than speaking so much, why don't you tell us about how you financed it?
Sure, it's all self-funded. So built my first business, Hoop Brothers, and got to a point where I could step away from Hoop Brothers to then invest my time and energy and money into Divergent U. Though there isn't a lot of upfront capital necessary, it's more of the curriculum development that's the most difficult piece. And so that's been years of iterations and developments with over 1,000 workshops at this point, multiple advisors, consultants. So I think the expense has been more on that side. Once we establish a campus, that's obviously going to be a large expense. But the way I'm planning it, that should be budgeted for.
Right. So a lot of it was sweat equity then.
Yeah.
Sweat equity, what we would say in the old days, shoe leather, right? And you built up from there rather than going to banks, finding yourself heavily in debt and then trying to figure out how to pay that back. Yeah. All right. The utility of that for our audience is that the true beauty of the message of all business, no bull, is we rather than to have, let's say, Gary V or a who's the real estate guy, Grant Cardone, and we're probably not at a point that they would even come on the podcast, but oftentimes, and with the greatest respect to these people, because they've accomplished a lot, if you listen to one of their talks, you listen to them all, right? And they become very savvy at speaking to people in such a way that they feel uplifted. However, after they finish the conference or finish listening to what it is, it wears off because there's no how-to there,
Okay.
right? Whereas on our program, we have real-life people, not somebody that lives behind some kind of an electronic curtain that you don't know if they really made their millions by what they're saying or not, right? Who keep their private lives private, and they have this public persona. We have people such as yourself who are like millions of other Americans who want to become successful and have come on the program and specifically told us how they became successful. And so I salute you in that. I really do. And I think millions of others watching this salute you. Now, how do you see the future of Divergent U and your own personal legacy? I think you've kind of touched upon it a little earlier, but maybe you can be a little bit more personal about it.
Sure. I try not to think about that, to be honest. I try not to think about legacy. I had a blood clot when I was during the pandemic. So Hoop Brothers is shut down, Divergent U shut down. Basically everything went to zero. And then I got a blood clot in my arm, went to the emergency room.
Oh my goodness,
I thought, I saw something in my hand, my arm was a little numb, drove to the hospital, figured it would be nothing, Googled it, and Google's like, it might be a blood clot. It's like, okay, sure. Get there, and then the doctor comes back, and he's like, you have a blood clot in your arm, and we're going to take you right back for a CT scan of your chest to see if it's in your lungs or your heart, because that would be life-threatening. Like, okay, what does that mean? We'll find out when we get the scan. And so like at this point, I'm panicking because nobody knows I'm at the hospital. My phone just died. And, I've basically have lost everything at that point. And as I'm being pulled back for that scan, I remember basically making my peace, where it was like, I've done what I needed to do. I've done enough. And if what I've done is all I get to do, I can accept that. And I think since then, I haven't thought as much about legacy of like, what do I want to leave behind? I feel like what I'm doing now feels like extra credit. And so I feel like I've done enough that if I were to die tomorrow, God forbid, I feel like I've made my peace with that. And so as far as legacy and impact, there's a level of ego there where like I want to have a massive impact on the world, and I believe I can and will, but it's not what drives me. I think I'm more driven to do the best that I can do with what I've been given, and I think I've been given a lot of unique opportunities, perspectives, life experiences, drives, if you want to call it that. I don't know.
There's something very deep there that you might not realize. Remember how earlier I was asking you if you had any Eastern influences, right? Well, samurai, during a sword fight, they didn't have any time to think, because just very much like basketball, what you do has to be instantaneous. So it's not as if you can spreadsheet it out to death, Excel it out to death. For example, you're a tall guy, so I'm assuming you were either center or one of the wings, right? So let's say you're running up center. There's a guy on the side. There's another guy on the side. When they're not looking at each other, one guy passes the ball from behind his back, gets caught by another one. He passes it to you, and then you dunk it, right? Now, all of that came out in practice, but it wasn't as if it's not as if I'm sitting here with a list of questions. We go with the flow.
Yeah.
But we go with the flow, but it's not completely spontaneous either, right? There's some preparation, right? So what you were describing about not really thinking about legacy, so I'll tie it back into what I was saying about the samurai. The samurai consulted with Zen priests, basically saying, how can I eliminate the fear of death such that during a sword fight I can act spontaneously? And the Zen priests showed them how. In other words, and that was to basically completely let go and just act. And oftentimes, for example, we've all had the occasion of where we'd been driving and we got into a near fatal accident, and we simply acted. And more often than not, we did the right thing.
Yeah.
And we got the jitters afterward. But at a deeper level, our instinct knew exactly what to do, right? And that's similar. And there was actually a term for it in the Zen literature, where the Zen priest taught the samurai how to be able to act spontaneously, and I believe they called it instantaneous intelligence. And so, at a very deep level, I think you show that maturity in terms of being able to put aside the ego and to think dispassionately. Yeah.
I think I have a lot of practice with that even in class. So like I feel my job as a facilitator for Divergent U is to hold space for all of the ideas to exist. So I try to whenever I think of ideas, I try to disconnect from the ideas themselves and like throw them on the whiteboard. And with that, we'll kind of debate the idea. We'll challenge the idea. We'll question the idea. What does that idea mean? What does that word mean? I do that all the time with just any word.
So that you're not burdened by the attachment.
Sure. Yeah. I think that's there's a whole rabbit hole there we could jump down around convergent thinking and how people attach their identity to their ideas. And basically like a convergent debate, for example, would be I'm defending my point of view. So like I'm trying to make a point, and everything that I have to say is to make that point. That would be a convergent, because the convergent is a point where divergent is more of a question. It's like a question mark versus a period in some sense. Where if I'm a divergent debater, I'm coming into the debate to ask questions, to be curious, to expand what I think, not to defend a point. And so I think I've had a lot of practice with that in class, hundreds, almost 1,000 probably workshops now that I've led with students and a whiteboard, just asking questions, hearing all ideas. And I like to juxtaposition ideas. So if one person says something that's different from something someone else said, I'll reflect it to the room. It's like, oh, you said this and you said this. Those are different. What do we think of that? And everybody gets to weigh in at that point. So I think I've had a lot of practice with that.
Which requires the ability to say that I'm not always right.
Yeah.
And by doing so, you gain even more credibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people know that you can't be the dear leader, as they would say in North Korea, right?
Yeah.
That's all just mythical.
Yeah.
Right. We've had a fascinating discussion. I think you are a extremely interesting person, and I hope that our relationship would not just be speaking behind microphones, but it could evolve into something more akin to a friendship.
Absolutely.
Now, you are such a complex individual that there's no way that I could have touched upon everything you wanted to discuss during our brief talk today. I necessarily, not by intention, have definitely not touched upon areas of interest that you might have wanted to talk about. Is there anything that you can think of? Just off the cuff, maybe?
I like the flow. I mean, I think the main thing I would want everybody watching and listening to do is check out Divergent U. Check out our websites, divergent-u.com. Come out to our events every Tuesday, Thursday, 6 p.m. It's a great environment to meet like-minded people, if nothing else, and just get a feel for the environment around divergent thinking and what a divergent thinking learning environment feels like in person, and what that experience can be. So I think that's the main thing that I would hope people can check out. Other than that, I love the flow of the conversation.
If somebody wants to contact you, let's say, for example, if someone was interested in Divergent U, well, they go to the website. If someone is interested in, let's say, having you for a public appearance, or any such thing.
Sure.
Would they contact you through the Divergent U website, or do you feel comfortable in giving your personal information, or would they go through your CEO or a public?
The best way to contact me would either be through LinkedIn. You can add me on LinkedIn, just Sam Terrell, or my Instagram. It's just Sam Terrell on Instagram.
Well, Sam, I have to say that it's been an extremely rewarding experience and an honor to sit and speak with you today. I would have never imagined months ago that we'd be sitting here having this conversation, and I'm really, really, really happy we did so. Thank you so very
Grateful
much,
for
Sam.
the opportunity.
Yeah, and I hope that we'll be able to repeat this as well.
100%.
Yeah.
That'd be
Okay,
great.
well, Sam, thank you so very much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much.